collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank has raised some serious questions about the American banking system, when not one but two banks collapsed in a span of about 48 hours. But while those tremors are being felt in global markets and Indian markets, there are some serious questions being asked about what the impact will be on the Indian startup ecosystem. For some context, a lot of Indian startups that have businesses or subsidiaries in the United States were banking with SVB, or the Silicon Valley Bank. It was a favorite, in fact, and as many other depositors have found themselves stuck or panicked, so have they. Now, the Union Minister of State for IT and Electronics, Rajeev Chandrasekhar, has met with a group of startups today, and he's joining us now to give us a sense of what help can be extended to these companies, what are the lessons learned from this, and whether there is a fear of a contagion. Thank you so much, Mr. Chandrasekhar, for speaking with us at Times Network. Let me begin by getting your assessment of how grave the hit is as far as Indian startups are concerned, because there are all sorts of numbers out there on the number of startups that have either deposits in SVB or have investments from SVB. What is your assessment?
Well, look, I think the crisis that was a crisis that unfolded 5 days ago was a serious crisis, because it went to the heart of impacting a large number of our startups who had deposits in the Silicon Valley Bank. It was not so much of an issue for those who had received investments from the bank. The issue was really to do with the large amount of deposits that had been placed in the Silicon Valley Bank by a large number of Indian startups and investors on their behalf. And that certainly posed a huge risk to the whole startup ecosystem, because that cash meant their liquidity, that cash meant their ongoing ability to finance their operations, payroll, and that was certainly a concern 5 days ago. Yesterday, after the US Fed and the FDIC took that decision of making the deposit holders whole, and that it signaled that there would be no haircut that the deposit holders had to bear as a cost of this meltdown of this bank, I think the peak of that crisis had passed. Now the residual sort of impact of this crisis is, if you want to call it that, is the fact that most of these deposit holders are unable to access all their deposits in one go, and therefore there is a time lag, there is a certain uncertainty in terms of how quickly you can access that deposit that the FDIC and the US Fed has said will be whole. So there is a certain liquidity issue, there is a little concern, and there is certainly an overhang of trauma around the whole ecosystem of startups, who certainly amongst the young, talented, creative entrepreneurs had signed up to innovate and build new platforms, had not signed up to have a supposedly rock-solid blue-chip AAA bank fall down in 3 days. So I think there is a little bit of that trauma in the system for sure, and there is a concern about ongoing liquidity in the short term. And that is why we have made it our mission as in the government to reach out to them, to engage with them, and to tell them very clearly that the government of India will stand shoulder to shoulder with them to ensure that these challenges are somehow circumvented and mitigated. So I think it has been part solution making and part also saying, look, don't panic, we are here for the course to tide you over this storm.
Okay, so just a few specifics, if I can ask. One, you said a large number of Indian startups would have been impacted on the scale of the crisis day before yesterday, before the US Treasury came and said that depositors' money will be secured. Can you give us a ballpark figure or some kind of assessment of how many startups would have been hit?
No, I certainly cannot, because it's not clear to me even now how many of our startups had insured deposits, how many of them were in this current account type uninsured structure. That detail, that granularity and that visibility, we still don't have it. I suspect the RBI and the Ministry of Finance have it, or if not all of it, part of it. But the issue was that this was the fact that a large part of these corporate deposits were uninsured led to this serious panic 5 days ago about what would happen if those deposits had to take a haircut, what would happen to the company's liquidity, what would happen to the company's solvency. The solvency issue has now given way to what I believe is a much more manageable liquidity issue. And the liquidity is a short-term issue because since the commitment is there that the deposits will be made whole, the issue is really about the differences in timeline between when the startup requires the capital to when the capital will be made available from their deposits. So I think it's an issue of mismatch, if there is any. There is certainly some clarity that is required on that from the Fed and the FDIC and the new management of the Silicon Valley Bank. But what we have said to the startups is, regardless of that, we will in the government of India will work, and this the finance minister who's been closely following this for the last 6 days, monitoring it along with the RBI, is certainly prepared to work with the startups and evolve some deposit-backed lines of credit or that type of a structured type of finance which will address short-term liquidity.
So we are, the Indian government is willing to extend financial support to these startups if they're stuck for liquidity right now. What is the other kind of sort of outcome of the meeting you've had today? Can you give us some details of that?
No, Tamanna, what I said was I think the startups are looking from the government for that type of support, or from the Indian banking system, not so much from the government, from the Indian banking system for standby lines of credit because with the backstop of their deposits that the Fed and the FDIC have said will not be, there will be no haircut, there will be no loss. So I think that is what they expect the Indian banking system to deliver. That is certainly a recommendation that we will make to the Ministry of Finance and the RBI, and we believe that is in the realm of being possible.
So that expectation from the Indian banking system, sir, would be met only if the government of India decided to lend its weight to the banking system. We know right now that some Indian banks are trying to help these companies open accounts in Gift City, Nostro accounts, etc. But for that kind of financial sort of heft, the Indian government will have to step in, isn't it?
No, so look, so the basic point, Tamanna, is the following: that the asset that is theirs, the deposit that is their asset, is an asset that is unimpaired and is being clarified by the Fed and the FDIC will remain whole. So now the issue is only the temporary mismatch between the access of the startup to that cash versus the cash that they require today. So there is a mismatch, and you can refer to that as a deposit-backed financing that the banks can offer, or deposit-backed financing that already a large number of neo-banks are offering online. So I think this is a problem that can be solved. It would have been a much graver problem if there was a haircut, there were some deep losses on these uninsured deposits. That would have caused a fundamental solvency issue for the startups. This is a simpler liquidity issue. I can't speak for the Ministry of Finance, as you realize, but I certainly believe it is in the realm of possibility for the Government of India and the RBI to work together to solve the problem that is the problem that the startups have today, which is a liquidity, short-term liquidity problem.
Okay. Larger lessons, if I may ask, Mr. Chandrasekhar, from this entire episode, because I saw some of your comments and they also talked about how robust the Indian banking system is and how Indian startups should use it. Is this also an opportunity to look at why such a large number of Indian startups felt the need to bank with Silicon Valley Bank? In my conversations with some of these companies, they explain that if they have to run business there, if they have to get capital or raise capital from there, it's just simply easier. Are there alternatives that we can now offer?
Oh, absolutely. I completely believe that if there is a silver lining in this crisis, it is now the growing realization about how strong the Indian banking system has become, how strong the Indian financial sector and how stable and resilient the Indian financial sector today is compared to even the so-called strongest financial sector in the world, which is the US, which is supposed to be strongest and the best regulated financial sector in the world. So I think this is now bringing an automatic demand from startups to want to bank, to want to have their banking needs being addressed by the Indian banking system, rather than having to travel thousands of miles and deal with an unknown and deal with further kinds of crises like this. Certainly for a young 25-year-old startup who was building the next SaaS platform for an American market, to deal with this crisis has woken their eyes for sure, woken up to the reality that perhaps if the Indian banking system can step up and create these new credit products, new deposit credit products, and are accessible in the US, that they would prefer working with the Indian banking system. And that is certainly part of the recommendations that we are going to make to the Ministry of Finance and the RBI, including increased use of the IFSC's banks in the GIFT City, and having them being the bankers for our startups is probably the kind of medium-term to long-term solution that we want to propose to our startups.
Just one more aspect of that. One of the reasons that Silicon Valley Bank was reportedly so popular is because they were willing to take risky bets. The Indian banking system is definitely known to be robust, but is not known to be very flexible or willing to take risky bets in the startup space. That's a bridge that needs to be closed, isn't it?
No, but Tamanna, I think that is speaking to the equity side of Silicon Valley Bank. Understand that the Silicon Valley Bank today's problems are nothing to do with their equity bets. It is to do with how they've dealt with deposits and how they've on-lent deposits. The issue today is about how do we protect Indian depositors, Indian startups who have to have deposits in the US to finance their operations in the US. That has nothing to do with risk-taking. That is to do with actually prudence, banking. And the Indian banking system is the best banking system where prudency is a required attribute for its customers and clients. And startups, certainly who have worked very hard and have deposited $1 million or $2 million in their bank by raising capital, by accruing profits, certainly want to deal with prudent banks. They don't want to deal with banks that are making risky bets or have a resume that is full of risk in it. So I can assure you that while Silicon Valley Bank may have a resume full of risk-taking and cutting-edge risk and instruments and so on and so forth, for a real up-and-coming startup, they want to deal with a bank that can give them service, that can give them proactive, responsive service. But at the heart of that bank is prudent risk management and no damage to the deposits that these startups with trust put into the hands of these banks. And I think the Indian banking system has demonstrated over the last 9 years that we have now built a banking system that is prudent at its heart. The declining NPAs show that, and that this is a stable and robust banking system that is now, even in contrast with the American banking system, can take the rightful place and say, look, we are a better banking system for those depositors who want to make sure that the deposits are maintained prudently and managed prudently.
Right. Mr. Chandrasekhar, since I have you here, please allow me to ask on these draft amendments that were made to the IT rules in January 2023, because they created a lot of headlines. There were a lot of, statements from editorial groups and press groups, etc., which said that the IT ministry proposed an amendment on the takedown of social media or news content that has been marked as fake or false by the PIB or any other government agency. I know these are still under process and we have to yet see what the final iteration of these IT rules will be. But would you like to respond to some of the criticism and fear that was talked about when this came out?
No, 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 Tamanna, I certainly don't want to respond to those criticisms because the criticisms were based on an inaccurate reading of the facts. They did not understand it. There are no provisions in the rules to take down content. The only provisions in the IT rules from May 21 onwards is about conducting due diligence on the content that platforms host. The only provision for takedown is a well-documented lawful process under Section 69, which is used for national security and is often initiated by the Ministry of Home Affairs. In terms of fact-checking, the rules already provide for due diligence that platforms have to conduct if they have to enjoy the safe haven protection of Section 79 of patently false, misinformation, CSAM, religious incitement, and a whole category of content that they have to exercise extra due diligence on if they are to enjoy the benefits of immunity from legal action from aggrieved customers. So I think it is an inaccurate understanding to characterize this as takedowns. These are casual phrases that are bandied around by people who don't fully read the facts or read the rules. And therefore, at the right time, Tamanna, I'm more than happy to sit with you when the rules are notified in the coming week or 10 days around online gaming and the whole issue. I'm more than happy to have a detailed, intelligent conversation on the rules and their objectives and what we are seeking to do, which is to create an internet that 120 crore Indians can use, that is safe and trusted, it is open and it is accountable. We certainly don't want the internet in India to be a toxic space, and we are doing everything in our powers to make sure the big platforms have a responsibility to contribute along with the government to make the internet in India a safe and trusted space for 120 crore Indians.
I'll absolutely take you up on that when the rules are finally out. And I think that's a fair point. We need to see what the final version is. You know, another hot button topic right now that I'd like your view on is artificial intelligence. And after ChatGPT, that's the big buzz. I saw you quoted, and you said this yesterday, in fact, that India is working on its own AI framework. Can you tell us a bit about that?
No, the framework is called India AI. It is an extremely comprehensive thrust towards AI. Our ambition, you know, India is the chairman of the Global Partnership for Artificial Intelligence, a community of nations involved in AI. We have taken on the chairmanship this year, and we believe we can be a significant player in shaping the future of AI, future of learning, future of these learning models, and we have a comprehensive roadmap that is currently being designed not by the government alone, by a partnership of the government, startups, academia, and industry. So that process is a work in progress, was launched yesterday, and I'll certainly be happy to share with you by middle of April what the overall goals and objectives and milestones that India AI intends to achieve. Like I said, by the middle of April.
Just one question, since we're in the middle of a parliament session, and right now there seems to be a complete standoff between the Treasury benches and the opposition. We've been talking about, what kind of rules the IT Act, and, opposition is talking about freedom of speech, etc. What's your take on what's going on? Should Parliament be completely in a bind because of what Rahul Gandhi has said in London a few days ago? And on the other hand, why do you think that the opposition is not allowing the function of Parliament over the demands for a JPC?
No, look, I know you've now strayed into the domain of politics, and therefore my response will be consistent with that. You asked the question, so I'll give you the answer. I certainly think Rahul Gandhi's this sort of unaccountable conduct of saying whatever he feels like about India, about India's institutions, in foreign audiences, and then seeking active intervention by foreign elements in the Indian democracy. These are not issues that can be just left to, I mean, on a good day, you would say, okay, this fellow is a joker, we should not pay attention to him. But he is the head of India's oldest political party. And to be making these statements in this irresponsible manner and to assume that this does not, you cannot be held accountable for this is, in my opinion, something that we should put a stop to. If you go out outside the country and you belittle India's institutions, then there has to be some consequences. At the very least, we are saying he owes the parliament, owes the government of India, or if not the government of India, the people of India and the institutions of India an apology, or at least clarify that he did not mean to defend the institutions of India. If he has a problem with the BJP, he can slander us, he can call us names, and he can do whatever he wants. But to then abuse the judiciary, abuse the media, abuse the parliament, abuse the Speaker of the House, abuse the chairman of the Rajya Sabha is, in my opinion, taking this issue of, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's speaking about, let's ignore him. I think that time is past. He has to be held accountable for what he says, and that is what we are insisting in Parliament. And I think that is absolutely justified. Even if you say that I'm speaking as a BJP Karyakarta or a BJP leader, I think even as an Indian citizen, I believe it is justified that he clarify why he says, why he abuses and disrespects institutions of India.
So the response that has been coming in from the other side, from the Congress, and in all fairness, I must ask you to respond to that, is that it is his freedom of speech to speak on his perception of what's happening in his country. So is the problem with what he spoke or where he said it?
You see, the problem, Tamanna, I think the freedom of speech protagonists tend to conflate freedom of speech with slander, abuse when it suits them. You see, these are the same people who legislated Section 66A. These are the same people who arrested people for cartoons. So you've got to be clear. You can't use freedom of speech when it suits you, and then it's not freedom of speech when it doesn't suit you. Then let's have a debate on what constitutes this right to slander. And then let's have that debate in Parliament. Instead of this is becoming eating the cake, having it too, and then when there is a question posed where accountability is sought, you hide behind freedom of speech. I certainly think this is total nonsense to bring freedom of speech into any conversation about Rahul Gandhi. Rahul Gandhi today in UK, and I don't want to give him more importance than is necessary, but certainly it becomes an issue when he is trying to deride Indian democracy. He is trying to deride Indian institutions, including the judiciary and the media, at a time when the rest of the world looks at India and says, look, this is the example of democracy. This is how a democracy should be. So anyway, I don't want to get too much into a debate on this with you, Tamanna. You pressed a hot button with me and I'm obviously responding. I certainly don't want to have this long conversation about Rahul Gandhi. I've never thought he deserves too much of my time or too much of my energy.
I wanted your response because this is the hot button issue right now in Parliament. Lawmaking has come to a standstill in this session because of this. So I thought it's a relevant issue to get your response on. But having said that, thank you for your time.
Yeah.
And thank you for speaking with us in such detail today.
Thank you.